The Indian entered the wrong fort. They thought it was an attack. What he'd brought moved them. The wind howls like a wounded beast across the Wyoming territory as snowflakes the size of silver dollars slash through the frigid December air. Fort Harrison stands like a lonely sentinel against the white fury of nature, its wooden walls dark and imposing against the blizzard that has been raging for 3 days straight. Inside the main watchtower, Private Tommy Henderson peers through the frost-covered window, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter cold. His hands shake as he grips his rifle, though whether from the cold or fear, he cannot tell. The 19-year-old soldier from Pennsylvania has never experienced a winter this brutal, and the isolation is beginning to gnaw at his sanity. "Jesus Christ, when is this storm gonna end?" he mutters to himself, wiping the condensation from the glass with his sleeve. Below in the courtyard, Captain James Wheeler emerges from the commander's quarters, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl that has deepened over his 15 years of frontier service. Snow clings to his graying beard as he surveys the fort's defenses. The storm has kept everyone on edge. 3 days without contact from headquarters, 3 days of uncertainty, and Wheeler knows that in Indian territory, uncertainty kills. The captain's boots crunch through the snow as he makes his way to the armory, where Sergeant McKinnon is conducting inventory. The Scotsman looks up from his ledger, his red hair barely visible beneath his wool cap. "Ammunition stores are holding steady, Captain, but the men are getting restless. This storm's got everyone spooked." Wheeler nods grimly. "Keep them busy. Idle hands and nervous minds make for dead soldiers out here." Suddenly, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoes across the courtyard, followed immediately by Private Henderson's voice screaming from the watchtower. "Rider approaching! Hostile incoming!" Every man in Fort Harrison freezes. In the space of a heartbeat, the peaceful morning explodes into chaos. Soldiers burst from their quarters, weapons in hand, as the alarm bell begins its frantic clanging. Wheeler draws his Colt revolver and races toward the main gate, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Battle stations! All men to positions!" Wheeler's voice carries over the storm as soldiers scramble across the icy courtyard, slipping and sliding in their haste to reach their defensive positions. Through the driving snow, a figure on horseback materializes like a ghost from the white void. The rider is bent low over his mount, a painted war pony that struggles against the deep drifts. Even through the blizzard, the soldiers can make out the distinctive silhouette, long black hair whipping in the wind, the unmistakable profile of a Plains Indian warrior. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God," whispers Corporal O'Brien from his position behind the wooden barricade. "They're attacking in this weather?" The rider draws closer, and more details become visible through the swirling snow. War paint streaks across his face, a leather pouch clutched tightly against his chest, and something else, something that glints metallic in the dim winter light. "Hold your fire until my command," Wheeler shouts, though his own finger hovers dangerously close to his trigger. His mind races through tactical possibilities. A lone rider in a blizzard could mean anything: a scout, a diversion, or perhaps a desperate final attack from a dying war party. The Indian's horse stumbles in the deep snow just 50 yards from the gate, and for a moment, it appears both rider and mount might disappear into the white abyss. But the warrior recovers, urging his exhausted pony forward with words spoken in a language none of the soldiers understand. Young Private Henderson's rifle barrel shakes violently as he aims down at the approaching figure. "Captain! He's got something in his hands. Could be a weapon." The tension in the fort reaches a breaking point. 23 soldiers, all with weapons trained on a single rider who appears to be carrying something precious against his chest, something he protects even as his horse struggles through the punishing storm. Wheeler's military instincts war with something deeper, something that whispers caution in the back of his mind. In his years on the frontier, he has learned to read the signs, to distinguish between aggression and desperation. And what he sees in this lone rider's approach is not the calculated advance of an attacker, but something else entirely. The Indian warrior's face is etched with exhaustion and something else grief. His eyes, barely visible through the snow and paint, hold a haunting emptiness that speaks of loss beyond measure. Whatever he carries pressed against his chest seems to be the most important thing in his world. "Sir!" Sergeant McKinnon calls out from his position. "What are your orders?" The rider is now close enough that they can hear his labored breathing, can see the frost forming on his horse's muzzle. He makes no aggressive moves, raises no weapons, but continues his steady approach toward the fort's main entrance. In his arms, the mysterious bundle shifts slightly, and for just a moment, something pale becomes visible through the leather wrapping. Captain Wheeler's blood runs cold as recognition begins to dawn. His extensive experience with frontier warfare has taught him to recognize many things, and what he glimpses in that brief moment sends ice through his veins that has nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. The rider reaches the gate and slowly, carefully, dismounts from his exhausted pony. He looks up at the assembled soldiers with eyes that hold no malice, no threat, only a desperate plea that transcends language and culture. In his arms, he cradles his burden with the tenderness of a mother holding her child. "Please," the warrior says in broken English, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. I bring home." The leather wrapping falls away slightly, and what the soldiers see beneath makes several of them lower their weapons in shock. Private Henderson's rifle slips from his numb fingers, clattering against the wooden platform of the watchtower. Captain Wheeler holsters his revolver, his face pale with a terrible understanding of what stands before them. This is no attack, no act of war. This is something far more profound, something that will challenge everything these men thought they knew about their enemy. The storm continues to rage around Fort Harrison, but inside the walls, a different kind of tempest is about to begin, one that will forever change the hearts and minds of every man present on this bitter December morning. The Indian warrior takes another step forward, and the full truth of what he carries is about to be revealed, along with a story that will shake the very foundations of everything these soldiers believe about the savage wilderness and the people who call it home. The silence that follows the warrior's words hangs heavier than the storm clouds above Fort Harrison. Captain Wheeler stands frozen at the gate, his weathered hand still resting on his holstered Colt, while 22 pairs of eyes stare down at the lone figure who has just shattered their assumptions about warfare and enemies. The Indian warrior's chest rises and falls with exhausted breaths, creating small puffs of vapor in the frigid air. His war pony stands behind him, head lowered, ice crystals forming on its dark mane. The animal's flanks heave with the effort of carrying its rider through miles of treacherous terrain, and steam rises from its sweat-soaked coat despite the bitter cold. "What did he say?" whispers Corporal O'Brien from his position behind the barricade, his Irish accent thick with confusion and fear. Sergeant McKinnon slowly lowers his rifle, his keen Scottish eyes studying the warrior's face. "He said he brings home, Corporal. Question is, brings what home?" The leather bundle in the warrior's arm shifts again, and this time, a small pale hand becomes visible, fingers curled in the peaceful gesture of sleep. Private Henderson, still reeling from what he glimpsed moments before, feels his stomach lurch with a terrible understanding that begins to wash over him. Captain Wheeler takes a cautious step forward, his military training warring with his growing realization that this moment requires something far beyond tactical knowledge. "You?" He addresses the warrior directly, his voice carrying across the courtyard with authority tempered by uncertainty. "State your business here." The Indian warrior looks up at Wheeler with eyes that seem to hold the weight of 1,000 sorrows. His face, painted with traditional markings that now run slightly in the melting snow, reveals a young man, perhaps no more than 25 winters. The paint cannot hide the exhaustion etched into every line of his features, nor the desperate hope that flickers in his dark eyes. "I am Iona of the Lakota. he says, his English halting but clear. I seek Fort Mackenzie. Storm, storm make me lost. He adjusts his grip on the bundle, and more of its contents become visible. A small boot, child-sized, dangles from beneath the leather wrapping. The fort erupts in whispered conversations as soldiers begin to piece together the implications of what they're witnessing. This is not Fort Mackenzie. Fort Mackenzie lies 30 miles to the north, beyond the worst of the storm's path. This warrior has been riding blind through the blizzard, following what he believed to be the correct trail. Fort Mackenzie is 2 days' ride north of here, Wheeler says, his voice softening despite himself. This is Fort Harrison. He pauses, studying the warrior's face carefully. What is it you carry, son? At the word son, something breaks in Iana's expression. His stoic warrior's mask crumbles for just a moment, revealing the raw grief beneath. He looks down at his burden, then back up at the assembled soldiers, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of unbearable loss. 3 suns ago, I find on the prairie, little soldier, lost in storm. I try. His voice breaks, and he must pause to gather himself. I try to save. The leather wrapping falls away completely now, revealing what Iana has carried through 30 miles of blizzard conditions. In his arms lies the body of a young boy, no more than 10 years old, dressed in a miniature cavalry uniform. The child's face is peaceful, almost serene, but the blue tinge to his lips tells the story of a death that came slowly, mercilessly, in the bitter cold of the Wyoming winter. Several soldiers cross themselves, while others remove their hats in instinctive respect for the dead. Private Henderson, still in the watchtower, feels tears freeze on his cheeks as he stares down at the scene unfolding below. Dear God in heaven, breathes Sergeant McKinnon. That's little Billy Patterson. The name strikes the fort like a lightning bolt. Billy Patterson, the 10-year-old son of Colonel Patterson from Fort Mackenzie, who had been traveling with a supply wagon to visit his father for Christmas. The wagon train that had been reported missing 3 days ago, lost somewhere in the storm between the settlements and the fort. Captain Wheeler's mind races as the full picture begins to form. This Lakota warrior had found the boy, probably already dying from exposure, and had spent days trying to save him. When that proved impossible, he had made the decision to bring the child home, to return him to his people with honor and dignity. The boy, Wheeler says quietly, stepping closer. Tell me what happened. Iana looks up at the captain, and in that moment, Wheeler sees not an enemy warrior, but a fellow human being who has carried an impossible burden across an unforgiving landscape. The Indian's voice, though accented and broken, carries the weight of absolute truth. I find him by Frozen Creek, crying for father. Wagon broken, horses gone, men all dead. Boy still alive, but... Iana shakes his head sadly. Winter spirits too strong. I make fire, give food, keep warm 3 days. He tell me his name, tell me about father at Soldier Fort. He asked me to take him home. The courtyard has fallen completely silent except for the howling wind. Even the storm seems to pause, as if listening to this tale of tragedy and unexpected compassion. Before the winter spirits take him, Iana continues, his voice growing stronger. Little soldier, give me this. He reaches into his pouch with one hand, never loosening his protective grip on the boy's body, and withdraws a small object that glints silver in the pale light. It is a military medallion, engraved with the name, William Patterson, and the insignia of the 7th Cavalry. Below the boy's name, in child's careful handwriting, are the words, For Papa Christmas 1876. The sight of the medallion breaks something inside several of the hardened soldiers. Corporal O'Brien turns away, his shoulders shaking, while others struggle to maintain their composure. This is not just the return of a body, this is the completion of a final mission, the delivery of a Christmas gift from a son who will never see his father again. Captain Wheeler accepts the medallion with hands that tremble slightly. The silver is still warm from Iana's pouch, and Wheeler can see where the boy's small fingers had polished it carefully in preparation for presenting it to his father. "He say," Iana continues, his voice now barely above a whisper, "tell Papa that Billy not afraid. Tell Papa that Indian warrior keep him safe on journey to spirit world. Tell Papa." His voice breaks completely now, and tears flow freely down his painted cheeks. "Tell Papa that Billy love him very much." The emotional impact of these words ripples through the assembled soldiers like a physical force. These are men hardened by years of frontier warfare, men who have seen death and violence as daily companions, yet they stand transfixed by this display of compassion from someone they have been taught to view as their enemy. Young Private Henderson climbs down from the watchtower, his movements mechanical, his face streaked with tears. He approaches Captain Wheeler with obvious uncertainty, then speaks in a voice thick with emotion. "Captain, sir, my little brother back in Pennsylvania, he's about Billy's age. If something happened to him, if he was lost and scared." Henderson looks at Iana with new understanding. "I'd want someone like this man to find him. I'd want someone to care enough to bring him home." The transformation happening within Fort Harrison's walls goes beyond simple sympathy. It represents a fundamental shift in understanding, a recognition that humanity transcends the artificial boundaries of race and culture. Here stands a Lakota warrior who has sacrificed days of his own safety to honor the final wish of a dying enemy child, who has risked his life to cross hostile territory in the worst storm of the winter. Captain Wheeler finds himself facing a decision that will define not only this moment, but the kind of man he chooses to be. Military protocol demands one response, but the higher calling of human decency demands another. The storm continues to rage around them, but inside the walls of Fort Harrison, something far more powerful than weather is reshaping the hearts and minds of everyone present. The question now is not whether this Indian warrior is friend or foe, but how these soldiers will respond to an act of grace that challenges everything they thought they knew about the nature of their enemies and themselves. Iana stands waiting in the snow, still cradling his small burden, still hoping that he has somehow found his way to the right place after all, even if it is not the place he originally sought. In his arms, little Billy Patterson begins his final journey home, carried by the compassion of a stranger who became, in his final moments, the gentlest of guardians. The revelation is complete, but the true test of character for every man in Fort Harrison is just beginning. Captain Wheeler stares at the medallion in his palm, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, like the heavy snow that continues to fall around them. The silence stretches on, broken only by the wind whistling through the fort's wooden structures and the soft snorting of Iana's exhausted war pony. "Open the gates!" Wheeler commands suddenly, his voice carrying across the courtyard with quiet authority. Sergeant McKinnon's head snaps up in alarm. "Sir? Are you certain that is wise?" Wheeler looks at his trusted sergeant, then at the faces of his men arrayed around the courtyard walls. Fear, confusion, and something else, a growing recognition of shared humanity, wore across their weathered features. "Sergeant, this man has traveled through hell itself to honor a child's dying wish. The least we can do is offer him shelter from the storm." The heavy wooden gates creak open with reluctance, their hinges protesting against the accumulated ice and snow. Iana steps forward slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, clearly aware that despite the captain's words, 20 rifles still track his every step. As he crosses the threshold into Fort Harrison, the full scope of his journey becomes apparent. His leather clothing is torn in several places, revealing healing wounds from thorns and rocks encountered during his desperate ride. Frost clings to his eyebrows and the long black hair that streams behind him. His moccasins are wrapped with strips of cloth to provide additional warmth, and the paint on his face has mixed with melted snow to create rivulets of color down his cheeks. "You men return to your posts," Wheeler orders. "Maintain vigilance, but lower your weapons." He turns to Iona, studying the young warrior's face with new eyes. "You must be exhausted. When did you last eat?" Iona shifts the boy's body carefully, adjusting his grip with the tenderness of a father. "2 sons. Give last food to little soldier before." He cannot finish the sentence, but the implication hangs heavy in the cold air. Private Henderson, still standing near the captain, suddenly steps forward. "Sir, if I may, there's hot coffee in the mess hall, and some of that stew Corporal Martinez made yesterday." He looks directly at Iona, his young face earnest and open. "You shouldn't have to carry that burden alone, sir. Not anymore." The unexpected offer of assistance from the same soldier who had been ready to shoot him moments before creates a visible crack in Iona's stoic composure. He blinks rapidly, fighting against the emotion that threatens to overwhelm him. In his own language, he speaks a few words that sound like a prayer, then looks back at Henderson with gratitude evident in his dark eyes. "You are kind, young warrior. But first—" Iona looks around the courtyard, taking in the assembled soldiers, the snow-covered buildings, the American flag whipping frantically in the wind above them. "First, I must know. Will you help me take little soldier to his father? Will you help me finish what I promise?" Captain Wheeler feels the weight of command in a way he has never experienced before. This is not about military strategy or territorial disputes. This is about something far more fundamental: the basic human obligation to honor the dead and comfort the grieving. He thinks of his own son, safe back in Ohio, and imagines how he would feel if their roles were reversed. "Fort McKenzie is still 2 days' ride in good weather," Wheeler says slowly. "In this storm, it could take a week to reach them safely. But—" He pauses, looking around at his men, seeing the change that has already taken place in their faces. "But I believe we can arrange for an escort. A proper military escort to see young Billy home." The relief that washes over Iona's features is immediately followed by a new concern. "You would do this? For enemy warrior? You are not our enemy," Wheeler says firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Not today. Today, you are a man who has shown more honor and compassion than many soldiers I have known. Today, you are welcome in this fort as our guest." Sergeant McKinnon approaches, his skepticism warring with grudging respect. "Captain, with your permission, I'd like to prepare a proper resting place for the boy. We have a chapel, small as it is. Seems fitting to lay him out proper-like while we wait for the storm to pass." Iona's understanding of English may be limited, but the sergeant's tone and gestures convey his meaning clearly. The Lakota warrior nods slowly, then looks down at the small form in his arms. "Billy Patterson was brave little soldier. He deserved honor of warrior's farewell." As the group moves toward the fort's modest chapel, other soldiers begin to emerge from their positions. Some hang back, still uncertain about this unprecedented situation, but others draw closer, curiosity and sympathy overcoming their ingrained suspicions. Corporal O'Brien falls into step beside Private Henderson, his weathered Irish face thoughtful. "In all my years in this God-forsaken territory, I never thought I'd see the like of this. Makes a man wonder what other things we might be wrong about." Henderson nods, still processing the rapid shift in his own feelings. "My ma always said that God works in mysterious ways. Maybe this is one of those ways." Inside the chapel, Iona carefully lays Billy Patterson's body on the simple wooden altar. The small building, heated by a single pot-bellied stove, feels wonderfully warm after the brutal cold outside. Candles flicker in the drafts that seep through the log walls, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn interior. With infinite gentleness, Iona arranges the boy's uniform, smoothing the wrinkles and ensuring that Billy looks as presentable as possible for his final journey. From his pouch, he withdraws a small object wrapped in soft doeskin, a carved wooden horse, clearly made by Indian hands. "I make this for him while he still breathe," Iona explains quietly. "He like horses very much. Tell me about pony he have back home, how he teach it tricks." He places the carved horse in Billy's small hands, folding the child's fingers around it. "Now he have horse for spirit journey." The simple gesture breaks down the last barriers of suspicion among the watching soldiers. Here is their supposed enemy, treating their dead with reverence and creating a memorial gift with his own hands. The contradiction between their taught hatred and this observed reality creates a cognitive dissonance that forces each man to examine his own beliefs. Captain Wheeler removes his hat, and the other soldiers follow suit. In the flickering candlelight, with the storm raging outside, Protestant soldiers and a Lakota warrior stand together in shared grief for a child whose death has somehow bridged the gap between two worlds at war. But even as this moment of unexpected unity unfolds, questions remain unanswered. How did Billy Patterson's wagon train meet its fate? What other secrets might the storm have buried in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming Territory? And what will happen when word of this encounter reaches the outside world, where the appetite for war between whites and Indians continues to grow with each passing day? Iona stands beside the altar, his mission nearly complete, but his own story far from over. In his eyes, alongside the grief and exhaustion, there burns something else, a knowledge of things seen and unseen during his 3-day vigil over a dying child. Secrets that the howling wind seems eager to whisper to anyone brave enough to listen. The storm outside shows no signs of abating, which means these unlikely companions will have time to discover just how much more there is to this tale of loss, compassion, and the mysterious ways in which fate can transform enemies into brothers.